Welcome to Journey Through Time. I'm Sarah Churchwell.
And I'm David Olusoga.
And this is the second of our 3-part series on the history of reality television. A little experiment that we're undertaking here on Journey Through Time because you, David, undertook an experiment.
Yeah, I took part in Celebrity Traitors, and like all historians and all academics, when I do something slightly odd, I intellectualize it to try to make sense of crazy decisions.
To justify your decisions.
Exactly, yeah. So I'm trying now to understand the history of where reality TV came from to work out where my odd decision fits into that longer trajectory.
And as you say, it's a fine tradition. But as we tell this story, we are actually in the process of, well, some of us are in the process of watching your experience on Celebrity Traitors. So we have a kind of history, and then we have a future that we're all looking forward to see what happens.
I'm watching it at the same time as everybody else, because one of the traditions of reality TV is people who take part in it don't get to see it before it goes out. So
you don't know the outcome.
I am discovering just how silly I can look on television as in real time.
Well, we're all enjoying it very much, and we can get back to intellectualizing and justifying your decisions now. So happy to help with that.
Back to my comfort zone.
Exactly. Last week, we were telling the story of the origin of reality TV, how it came out of an incredibly popular show called Candid Camera. And then it kind of joined forces with the emerging format of fly-on-the-wall documentaries.
Yeah, it was like a Frankenstein creation. It took these kind of philosophies of direct cinema verite, fly on the wall, and kind of joined it together with Candid Camera entertainment. So the idea at the heart of it is ordinary people having ordinary conversations can be incredibly entertaining. And it's also, there's something really powerfully authentic about capturing those conversations, and that it can have an impact that anything scripted kind of sometimes just can't.
And so we ended last time with the very first modern reality TV show in the ways that we would understand it, about to be broadcast in 1973. An American Family.
That's right. Yeah, we ended on the sort of eve of the dawn of the reality TV revolution. In 1971, the US broadcaster PBS had bet the farm, $1.6 million budget, huge for the 1970s, on a new show called An American Family, which really is the first real modern reality TV show. I think by far the best book on this subject, Cue the Sun by Emily Nussbaum. She talks brilliantly and writes brilliantly about how this show brings together all of those other kind of strands. The subjects of An American Family were family from Santa Barbara in California called the Louds, Bill and Pat, and their 5 children. And they are on the verge of being the very, very first people to go through a new experience, becoming the first people to become reality TV stars.
So the idea was that the show was going to present an ordinary, everyday family, but that the family was sort of, if not ideal, that they were sort of, I think you said last time, aspirational, that this was a family that, every American family could aspire to be like. And so this is what we're going to watch, is this lovely family living their lovely life.
I mean, they were very American and very California. Lots of nice teeth, because you guys have better dentists than us, and they were all tanned, and they lived in a beautiful house, and they had a swimming pool. They were kind of the American dream made flesh and blood. They were wealthy, they were attractive, they were telegenic. The 5 kids were really cool. The house was great. They had loads of cars, and they had signed up thinking this was going to be this really fascinating experience. It was going to be this thing that they did. Let's give it a go. That kind of wild, let's throw a hat in the ring and see what happens. The problem is that if you film people month after month, day after day, this was filmed over 7 months, in the end, you do, and this is the cliche of reality TV, it's the thing that you think you will never do, you forget the cameras are there. You do acclimatize to being filmed, and you start being more real, whether you think you're going to or not. And I think this is what happened to the Louds, but it was worse than that, because their marriage, Bill and Pat Loud, was not in a good place before they started this TV experiment.
It does make you kind of wonder at that point, like, did you really think this was a good idea? It's, if you're already in a tense place, but maybe they thought it would bring them back together. I'm not trying to be judgmental, but people make decisions in crisis scenarios for all kinds of reasons. But also, nobody can perform for 7 months. Nobody can be that controlled for 7 months. But clearly, in retrospect, we have to think that if there were already tensions in their marriage, this can't have helped.
No, I think it's clear that it didn't, because what An American Family became was not a celebration of the American family, but the disintegration of a single American family. Because their most famous scene, the most talked about scene, was the moment in which Pat told her husband Bill on camera, on the show, that she wanted a divorce. She said, "Here's the card of my lawyer. I'd like you to move out." And this is a kind of shocking, really, really powerful moment in the history of American television and the history of reality TV.
Nobody would have ever seen anything like it. And it's important to remind people or remember, I mean, I almost forget this, but divorce really still did have a stigma in the 70s. My parents divorced in the same year, in 1973, and I grew up with that little bit of stigma. It wasn't terrible. I wasn't like shamed or humiliated, but I was definitely treated. I mean, I remember people saying that I came from a broken home and thinking, well, my home's not broken. I have a perfectly nice home with my mother and my sister, and my dad's over there in his nice home. And that's a little example. It's a trivial example. I was fine. But the way in which society still treated it as an aberration was just the norm, right? And so to see it on TV, to have this live family say, we're getting divorced, I think people might still think, again, because we're so acclimated to think all of this is familiar, how shocking and new that would have been. It would have been mind-blowing for a lot of people.
Yeah, because straight away it got to the heart of what reality TV can do, which is suddenly you have a phenomena that you know about and it attaches a face to it. It's not there's a divorce explosion in America. It's here are two people on television who you've got to know going through that experience. I think you always have to remember that reality TV, you have to think about what else is on TV at the same time. And the show I remember most from this period growing up, because it was on British television, about the American family was The Waltons. That was the image that
Very
TV...
realistic.
Yeah. But that was the image people were used to. And I think it says something kind of bigger about where the networks were, where popular television was in the 60s and 70s. Because TV in America was where you went to get away from the pressures of American culture, late 60s, early 70s. Yeah. It was the place of escapism. Yeah. And suddenly the issues, the concerns, the divisions, the tensions of the country, instead of TV being a place to escape from those tensions, suddenly with An American Family, those tensions are on TV.
Yeah. And this is a generation of people, certainly adults at that time, they had grown up watching shows with titles literally like Father Knows Best. Right? These are shows that are so carefully controlled and curated, and everything is about the happy patriarchal family where it will all work out fine. Any problem is resolved in 30 minutes. The show I remember from that period, The Waltons, definitely, which is another, for people who don't know them, these are incredibly sentimental family shows in which everybody loves each other.
Is the Appalachian Mountains?
Yeah,
or something?
They're in Appalachia. Yeah.
Yeah, they're a kind of country family, and they're just too sweet to be true. And it's lovely and idealized.
Very idealized, very, very sentimental, but also incredibly low stakes. So what those shows did, and the other really popular one at the time was The Brady Bunch, which I watched in reruns growing up. It's baked into my brain. I know every episode of The Brady Bunch. When you look back on it, even at the time, actually, with the Brady Bunch, we knew that it was also low stakes, that the Brady Bunch plots would revolve around like how the clan had to rally together to get Greg through his science project or to get Cindy over a cold or something. Like, it was incredibly trivial, but they would treat it as this kind of earth-shattering, and the whole family has to get together. And you would go, this is not real life. Even we as children knew that it wasn't real life. So the contrast between what family TV looked like, it's the era that's about to give us Little House on the Prairie. These incredibly sentimental pictures of perfect, idealized families. And then you have on the screen in front of you an actual American family.
Bill and Pat Loud getting divorced on television. And, 10 million people were watching every week. The Nielsen ratings, which is the kind of viewing figures for America, on one episode of An American Family, they recorded that 74% of all viewers in the city of Boston were watching An American Family. Now, there were, lots of channels then?
No, there weren't very many channels. So there would have been the three main broadcast channels. PBS would have been the fourth. And then most big cities had a local affiliate. Yeah. So you had 5 channels?
About 5 channels, yeah. So, but 74% of people watching one channel, that is...
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, as a TV producer, that's your fantasy. It's what you wake up at night imagining.
And certainly for PBS, which was much more popular then than it is now, partly because there were only the 5 channels. But even so, it was always worthy, and it had Masterpiece Theatre. It was the one that brought on the prestige BBC dramas. That was when we watched Elizabeth R. and stuff like that.
And Civilization with Kenneth Clark.
Civilization. So that was always going to be a slightly rarefied channel. It wasn't for everybody. So to get 76% of Boston watching PBS that's quite a phenomenon.
There was a huge reaction in terms of it was a popular show, but it began what, we tend to call a national conversation, because this show seemed to show everything that was wrong with America. People who were disturbed by this new emergence of this thing called reality TV just thought it was shining a light on things that disturbed America. Remember, this is not an easy time in American history, the early 70s.
Yeah. So 1973, obviously, it's Watergate. So the sense that our trust in our politics is fracturing. But, most importantly, we've already mentioned, this is the era of Vietnam. And so there's a massive generational conflict. There's massive racial conflict. There's this growing sense that America is, dare I say, a divided society, and that it's struggling to overcome those divisions, but also really a polarizing of left and right at the time as well. So they kind of became a litmus test, or like a Rorschach test, where people saw what they thought was worried about America in this family.
All those divisions between men and women, with the story of divorce, between generations, between conservative America.
I forgot to mention men and women, but feminism, that was important then
too. But all of these divisions, conservatives versus counterculture, you could see them if you wanted to through the story of the Loud family. And as well as there being huge interest in the show, there was an attack on this family. And that speaks to something really, really powerful about reality TV that the Louds were the first people to experience, which is the new form of fame that it created is what today we call a parasocial relationship. You might have your favorite basketball player, your favorite movie star, but you don't see them talking to their kids. You don't see what their kitchen's like. You don't see them in these very intimate situations. The only people you encounter in those situations are people you know. So reality TV created this sense of familiarity. And that, as the Louds discovered, opened up a capacity people had to judge them, not just to watch these programs, not just to worry about the issues that they raised, but to judge this family. And they were encouraged in doing that by the journalistic response. One journalist described the family as affluent zombies. Another said watching an American family was like glimpsing into the pit of everything that was wrong with America. This new form of fame that no one had ever seen before. This family, 5 kids and a couple whose marriage is falling apart, are thrown into the center of that.
What you've got is a pre-existing approach to criticism where people are used to writing, criticism of film and of other TV shows that are
about
scripted.
Somebody's performance.
About a performance.
Not about their personality.
Yeah. And so they come into it with that expectation, right? That's for the critics. They're like, well, this is my job. I criticize whether it's an enjoyable show and what are the characters like. And they don't think about the fact that these aren't characters. These are people being themselves. And as you say, so then they come in and they're encouraging audiences in already the human response to be judgmental. And so suddenly, instead of you don't have neutral audiences, you have audiences who become incredibly partisan and start to think that they have a relationship with these people.
Yeah. And all of the things that we worry about reality TV, you can see them from this very, very first show. The Loud family felt they had to kind of defend themselves. So they go on other shows to say that they've been misrepresented. The question about editing, whether they've been edited to present a certain picture of themselves, to show them in a bad light, that's raised. Pat Loud had to write a book, A Woman's Story, in 1974 to try to give her side of the story of her family's breakup. They go on to chat shows to try to sort of plead their case as if they're on trial. And again, it's just really hard to remember. No one has ever been through this before. They are the first people ever to go through this new form of fame that opens up a reaction from the public, which is unlike their reaction to sports stars or movie stars or anything else.
And it's that behind the scenes aspect that does that, isn't it? The sense that you're seeing these people as they really are, and that therefore you develop an imaginary relationship
that parasocial
with them.
Relationship
that parasocial
idea.
relationship. People were very clear quite early on, people watching this phenomenon, that something transformative was happening. There were some pretty heavy hitters who came in and were like, hang on, this is important.
It is really impressive that there were people at the time who worked out this is a revolutionary, this is not another show, this is a new form of television. The anthropologist, so you get anthropologists and philosophers writing about this show. Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, she said it was a new art form. She wrote this amazing sentence. You are a literary scholar, so you might not agree with her, but she said, reality TV was as important for our times as were the invention of drama and the novel for earlier generations, a new way to help people understand themselves.
I think she's absolutely right. And for her to see that right at the beginning, that reality TV was going to have this transformative effect, not just on TV, but on our society, which it absolutely has had. And the story that we're going to tell will show that. So yeah, Margaret Mead, no slouch, absolutely right about this. But she wasn't the only one. I mean, even French philosophers like Jean Baudrillard were commenting on the show as well.
Yeah, he pulled apart the claim the producers made that they lived as if the cameras were not there. Again, people were understanding what they were watching was not just new. It raised lots of ethical questions about editing, about intervention, about how people were, what they knew about what would happen before they said yes to taking part. And all these debates about the ethics of reality TV, there from the beginning, we're still having them today. But the show also created a critical phenomena, which is it created the first reality TV star. And that was the eldest son of Pat and Bill Loud, Lance. He was the breakout character. If his parents were kind of the first victims of reality TV, he was the first star to come out of it. And he was kind of just perfect for this medium. One of the reasons why the Loud family were cast, why the other 23 families who were interviewed were not, was because they saw the star quality in Lance from the absolute outset. He was comfortable on camera. He was very good looking. He was very charming. He was really, really funny, had an amazing turn of phrase. And he was someone who, when you see him, and again, he's on YouTube, he's worth looking up. He was probably going to be famous for something, even if the TV cameras had never turned up at his parents' home. But also, he was a figure who was so much part of American counterculture in the early 70s that he was also always going to be a divisive figure.
I said a minute ago that it was an era of tremendous generational divide, and the counterculture association with the younger generation and the anger directed at them by many of the conservative older generation really can't be overstated. But Lance Loud had a particular reason why conservatives were deeply threatened by him.
Lance was gay. The big revelation of the series was Lance's sexuality. Now, he didn't come out as gay on the show. His family already knew about his sexuality, but he was open about it. He was unashamed about it. He wasn't somebody who felt that he couldn't talk about himself and his relationships. And there's an amazing scene where his mother, Pat, comes to New York, where he's living, and they walk around Central Park, and he talks openly, very funnily, about his relationships and about his sexuality. The counterculture point, though, to hammer home the point, and this is almost like central casting, he is living in the Hotel Chelsea in New York, which is kind of like the headquarters of the counterculture in the 1970s. It's an astonishing place.
Yeah. It's as if he said he was living in Stonewall. It has such strong associations at the time. The Chelsea represents the whole bohemian scene, right? I mean, it's where Bob Dylan wrote, and he and Joan Baez have their famous affair and recording there, and Joplin stayed there, and Leonard Cohen sang about it.
Jimi Hendrix sang about it.
Patti Smith, Robert Mapplethorpe was there.
I think it's the Chelsea drugstore in Connor's Get What You Want by the Rolling Stones.
Jim Morrison.
Yeah, and Andy Warhol makes the film Chelsea Girls. I love that hotel. When I first started going to New York, when I was a young TV producer, it is not the most comfortable place to stay by any means, but I was just desperate to stay there. I mean, William Burroughs had, because there was also,
Kerouac, I think,
people were living there. That was the thing. It wasn't just a place where you could rent rooms.
People had apartments there.
But
were they still in the 90s? I didn't realize that.
I don't know, but I'd watched a famous Arena, the BBC arts documentary made by the great late Alan Yentob, with William Burroughs living there, and I think Kerouac. Kerouac must have been dead by then. It was the kind of coolest place in the world. It was a bit run down. It was a bit run down when I was there in the early 90s.
I'm not sure they've done it up since then. We're not doing a great ad for the Chelsea Hotel.
It is the most amazing place in New York, and it really, really was the most amazing place in the early 70s. Lance was an incredibly fascinating guy. He was on the fringes of Andy Warhol's factory scene. He'd been in San Francisco during the late 60s, during that kind of amazing, flower power, drugs and sex period. And that made him the first American openly gay TV celebrity. Suddenly, this guy who stands for all of these things, sexuality, counterculture, creativity, art, music, is on TV week after week after week, not playing a role, but being himself.
And that was when I first encountered An American Family. I said I learned about it when I was learning about celebrity culture, and it was actually because of that history of a gay representation on TV. That was when I first encountered it. And so, yeah, he is, I think, a really important figure in queer history as well.
I think Lance Loud does something really important that reality TV can do, which I think is unique, which is it can put a human face on a phenomena. I think it's really significant that the first openly gay TV celebrity in American history doesn't come from a drama, it comes from reality TV. It does have these conversations about class, about sexuality, about neurodiversity. It does put skin in the game, real people that, you might not know anybody gay, you might not know anybody who's neurodiverse, but on a reality TV show, you can meet them. And I think Lance Loud is the first person who kind of shows that there is a real positive, a real upside to what reality TV can do.
It's not just that you meet them, is it? To your point about the upside, it's that you see their humanity. So you might, meet them in a social situation and never get to know them. But when you see them as a full person, it's much harder to hate them because of the label or because of the difference.
He really challenged prejudice because he is just so incredibly funny and likable. And I have no doubt there were people who were uncomfortable with his sexuality who had to ask themselves some questions because of watching this kind of funny, good-looking, witty guy on TV for week after week after week, seeing his relationship with his mother, seeing his relationship with his siblings. He was a really important figure, as you say, in queer history, but also in American cultural history.
Well, and we were talking about the way the TV family was represented in the U.S. was, so idealized. But what that means is it's also stereotypical. And what he was doing was breaking stereotypes.
Yeah. I mean, they were what we today we call them a kind of, normal family. Yeah. The parents are divorced. The son is gay.
The son is gay.
Yeah, I mean,
They're very happy and well-adjusted. Yeah. They're doing great.
1973, not so much. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the Louds and An American Family. But the history of reality TV, of course, is not only the story of American families.
It's a transatlantic phenomena and it bounces across the Atlantic repeatedly. And this is one of the first time because the BBC looked at 10 million people a week watching.
Thought we'll have some of that.
Yeah, and they were doing that. So 1974, the BBC produces The Family, but it is very, very different. The family chosen are the Wilkins. They're from Reading. They're working class. This is not a big house in California with swimming pools and lots of cars. This is a family living in a flat in Reading. The father, Terry, was a bus driver. The mother, Margaret, was a greengrocer. Their oldest daughter, Marion, was 19. She was a hairdresser, and her boyfriend lived with the family, and they weren't married. Shock horror, 1974.
More breaking of stereotypes.
And exactly the same phenomena happens because people see them in an intimate space, see them at home, hear their private, what would have been private conversations had there not been a camera crew there. People attach to them that new form of fame where they feel not just that they know them, but because of that intimacy, they could also judge them. And they were really, really attacked and condemned in the press. They were said to be too real, too working class. I mean, there's a real class element to this. They were condemned for using bad language. They were condemned for discussing subjects that were said to be taboo. It was like open season. There's something about reality TV where people feel it's allowed to be judgmental.
Isn't it partly because people feel like the subjects, the participants, have literally asked for it? They literally signed up for it. So there's
Don't say that.
But I feel
That's not what I want to hear, Sarah.
But I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, David, but I feel like that is in some people's minds where they feel like people signed up for this, particularly today. We'll get into this, but that they knew what they were getting into. Yeah. But even then, part of the stigma would have been, wouldn't it, that, well, if you want to put yourself out there like that, because people are supposed to keep your dirty laundry hidden and you're supposed to keep your skeletons in a cupboard and you're supposed to not let it all hang out. And if you choose to air all of your dirty laundry in public, well, then you get what's coming to you. Yeah. Isn't that the attitude?
I think so, but I think also what is defined as dirty laundry. I mean, a couple who aren't married living together in 1974. Yeah, let's be clear.
I don't think it's dirty laundry.
No, but what's interesting is suddenly this isn't just a phenomena. Here's two young people that you can attack who become the kind of face of that.
Yeah, of a change in society that you resent and that threatens you. Yeah.
And, like the Louds in California, this is a family who've signed up for something which no one's done before. They haven't seen this. We don't know what this is like. This form of fame is new. It's just emerging. But I think, as I said earlier, I think there's a real class element. When you look at the reports, the way that they were attacked, Mary Whitehouse, the morality campaigner, attacked them. Monty Python did a really unpleasant sketch about them called The Most Awful Family in Britain, 1974. There was an element of a middle-class journalistic world that reviews television programs, that makes comedy shows, attacking a working-class family for not being like them. So there's something quite ugly in what happens. And I think both shows, An American Family and The Family in Britain, what they also demonstrated is that these issues, divorce, people living together before marriage, that reality TV can suddenly populate those conversations with real people. And if you're one of those real people, that is not a nice place to be.
So the family, even though they got attacked, though, it was really popular as well. It did really well.
It was really popular. It was really controversial, and it became a big focus of conversation. British television, I think, was much, much more worthy, much more kind of interested in kind of being gritty and real than American television. And so the next big reality show in Britain is called Living in the Past in 1978. Again, this is on YouTube. It is really worth watching. And it does my head in that this show was made, because as a TV producer, I read the details and I watch this show, and I can't for the life of me imagine how this was possible, even in the late 70s. A group of volunteers, 6 couples and 3 children, agreed to live in an Iron Age village, circa 200 BC. 1,000 people volunteered for this show. 1,000
live in the
people
Iron Age.
thought living in the Iron Age would be a good idea.
That's such a 70s thing.
I cannot believe a TV production put children into that environment. That would just be impossible today. I think about the risk assessment and my heart starts racing.
And of course, by this point, they've got, okay, it's only 5 years later, but they know now that people do come under attack for being on these shows. So by this point, to put children in that situation, they are starting to experiment on children, and they know it.
I should explain the conditions.
Yeah.
I mean, they are really, really living in an Iron Age village circa 200 BC all the time. They're not there on some days of the week.
Right.
That is where they live.
So they don't go off to a hotel and have a bath.
There are no nights in hotels, but there's also no modern equipment or technology of any sort. There are no toilets,
except
no
the cameras,
toothpaste.
presumably.
But amazingly, the cameras are only there 1 day a week.
Oh, right. Okay.
Which is just...
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, this is a real social experiment that is being filmed.
Right.
But there's no electricity, there's no soap, there's no news from the outside world. They have to plant their own crops, harvest their own crops. They have to make pottery. They have to make their own clothes. The only concession, the only piece of modern technology allowed was contraception.
Well, I'm glad they drew the line at making women give birth under Iron Age conditions.
That was... And there was kind of some weird stuff, like when they slaughtered animals, they had to get a guy from the local slaughterhouse to come up and with a stun gun. When they built their Iron Age roundhouse, they had to get the building inspector from the local council to come and waive the planning rules.
Completely Iron Age.
Yeah. So a guy turns up with a clipboard and says this Iron Age roundhouse is going to be is okay for planning permission. But it was crazy authentic. Archaeologists, historians oversaw every detail. It was actually made in BBC Bristol, where I began my career. When you watch it now, it looks kind of more like the 1970s than 200 BC, because all the guys have got beards anyway. It looks like a hippie colony.
It sounds so 70s.
It kind of looks almost like a sort of mockumentary. But the craziest detail is that they lived in those Iron Age conditions for 13 months.
I mean, it is absolutely staggering.
For more than a year.
And that you would volunteer for this. Yeah. I mean, I organized my life to get away from Iron Age conditions.
I mean, that's been a big theme of human history. It's like, let's not live like this anymore. Yeah. But I mean, Traitors, people who make it to the final of Traitors, it's 3 weeks. I'm a Celebrity's 3 weeks. I mean, Big Brother began, I think, 6 weeks, went up to 9, and then eventually 13. This is more than a year. Children, as well as adults, living in those conditions. No one would dream of doing this today. And it was astonishing. The thing which amazes me and I think we probably have the same views about hardship, unnecessary hardship, is that the couples all came out of it and said that their relationships had been improved by a year living in an Iron Age village. I'm struggling to believe them.
I mean, yeah, I'm quite sure it wouldn't improve my relationship to be in an
I've never gone camping and come out of it with a stronger relationship.
That you're not alone there.
Yeah.
Did they just take all of this, or were there any moments of rebellion?
There was some moments of pushback. I mean, there's stories that there was like a rebellion, a coup against the producers, where they were they made the camera crew and the producers clean the toilets. But
good for them.
But for the most part, I mean, they threw themselves into this, and I'm making fun of it as a TV producer because it's astonishing. But I mean, these are people who are really, really committed, and there's been follow-up programs, and they talk about this as a really, really positive moment in their lives. So I mean, they are clearly a lot tougher than me. I make television. I don't sort of put myself in those situations, or hadn't until recently, I should say.
I mean, it puts back to nature to shame, but it is the 70s kind of commitment to that, right? It's we're gonna live.
Yeah. And that idea of reality TV as social experiment, that doesn't end here. I mean, it does it moves on through the history. It is very often used later in the history of reality TV to justify some pretty dodgy and pretty exploitative shows, the claim that it's a social experiment. But this is, I mean, the bar of social experiment is pretty high. It's 13 months in an Iron Age village. And this was huge, again, massively popular in Britain. It was on the front page of the New York Times. The only kind of moment when the 20th century burst in to the Iron Age was when two journalists got into the site by arriving on a helicopter, which is...
Must have been a shock when you've been there for 13 months weaving your own, clothes. Suddenly there's a helicopter.
But you can see in, shows we're going to talk about next time, like Survivor, like Castaway, that idea of social experiment, being in the wilderness, that form of reality TV, that sort of DNA keeps going.
Because there's a Lord of the Flies aspect to it too, isn't there? That that when you take a group of people and you take them out of their normal conditions, that all bets are off and they have to reinvent the rules. You isolate them and you want to see what are the new ways of interacting, and you want to get a sense of, humanity in the raw and all of that stuff. So there's the social experiment, but there's also incredible dramatic interest in what will people do in these scenarios.
Yeah, but it's still purposeful more than being pure entertainment. And we're still a long way at this point from modern reality TV. And it was going to take technology changes, which is a recurring theme in this history, for a new revolution in reality TV.
So join us after the break and we'll talk about what changed the picture again.
Welcome back. We've been saying throughout that the history of reality TV is also a history of the technology of television. And I've been making TV since my late 20s. And I kind of lived through the tech revolution that allowed modern reality TV to be born. And it was because TV escaped from the kind of rules of physics of early movies and early television. Because there's always been this equation called a shooting ratio. How many hours filmed for an hour of a finished program or a finished movie? It is the question you don't want to be asked as a young producer. What was your shooting ratio? And a fear of wasting money, because film is expensive, meant that this kind of culture of scarcity shaped television. And that was a real problem for reality TV, because the mindset of TV was you plan everything, you have shot lists, it's as efficient as possible, because film is expensive, editing is expensive. So to make reality TV, you kind of need to escape that mindset. You need to just film everything and not in the back of your mind going, oh God, am I wasting film? How are we going to pay for this all to be edited? You can see the problem in the way the first reality TV show, An American Family, that we talked about earlier, was produced. That was a 12-hour show. They shot 300 hours of footage. That means the shooting ratio was 25-1, 300 hours of material shot for 12 hours of a finished program.
And is that a high shooting ratio?
That is crazy high for the 1970s. It was unheard of for the 1970s. And it took a year to edit those 300 hours.
So that made it very expensive.
Yeah, that's why it was so expensive. You just couldn't do that. And remember, that's one camera crew, sound and camera. If there'd been two, it would have been 600 hours. If there'd been three crews, it would have been 900 hours. It would have taken years to edit. It would have bankrupted PBS.
So those economics and that mindset obviously is not where we are now. So what changed?
The modern reality TV was born when film died and when there was a revolution in magnetic tape cameras that shoot onto tapes, that have their own batteries so that they're powered and they're much, much more mobile. And what they've allowed is for shooting ratios to just not be a problem. Modern shows like Traitors or Big Brother, they have multiple camera crews. They also have fixed rig cameras that are kind of remote controlled. And those shows, they shoot hundreds of hours a day for a single hour. Ratios of 1,000 hours of footage for 1 hour of TV are not unheard of. That would have bankrupted a whole network in the 1970s. It was just way beyond what was possible.
That's strictly because of the economics of film in that case, because you still need the hours of editing.
Editing was transformed as well by non-linear editing. You aren't cutting bits of tape together anymore. You're editing on computers. So magnetic tape, then being able to store the material on digital drives, and then eventually cameras themselves becoming digital. What that meant was all of the technological restrictions that meant you just couldn't spend hours and hours hoovering up every action, every conversation, filming with multiple crews, multiple cameras. All of that just went out of the window. And by the early 90s, television had got to a place where it was technologically advanced enough that you could shoot as much as you wanted and you could edit incredibly fast. It was still had a long way to go, but it allowed for a new form, a modern form of reality TV to emerge. And that emerged on what was then a quite young channel, MTV. This is the bit I remember.
This is the bit I remember too.
Yeah. So 1992, MTV launched a show called The Real World.
Changed everything.
Yeah, you remember?
Oh, totally. No, that was such
because we're about the same age.
Yeah.
So
talk about a national conversation. And in America, I mean, it was just for our so MTV was our generation's channel. I mean, I was a teenager.
It's what YouTube is now.
Yeah. I was a teenager when it started. Music videos were a new thing. We were all watching them. We were watching Madonna do the first videos. That was our generation. And then MTV launches the first reality TV show that I was aware of.
Yeah.
And that was a step change from Candid Camera, which was the only thing that I had kind of known before then.
What's fascinating is the producers of The Real World on MTV in the 90s had been inspired by watching An American Family in the 70s. They'd been kids and they'd watched this show that had shocked, that had kind of amazed, that had horrified America. They'd seen Lance Loud become this superstar. And the creators of The Real World had actually written to some of the Loud children, the kids of the Loud family, and spoken to them when they were producing a pilot that eventually, developed into The Real World. So they understood the DNA of what they wanted to do came from An American Family, and they understood that that was the blueprint that they wanted to copy. But they wanted to do it for a new generation, a new audience on a new channel that was young, fashion conscious, and aspirational.
So for anybody who hasn't seen The Real World, the thing that we were also...
Which is anyone way younger than us, basically.
Exactly. Anybody, who's not as old as we are. But for our generation, David, it's iconic.
It was magical. It was amazing.
What people need to picture is a combination of Friends and Queer Eye, because what it was these incredibly beautiful loft apartments, these talk about aspirational living spaces. And then they would bring together a group of young people who didn't know each other, but they would get to live in this amazing apartment and they would go live there together. And the exchange was that they got filmed and they had to have their lives be, or maybe they wanted their lives to be on TV, but that was the trade-off. And so we would watch these young people who were just like us.
Yeah. Living in an apartment that we'd love to live in.
That we could not afford to live in. And then just watch them living their lives. And it was just extraordinary.
Yeah. Their interactions, their conversations, their partying was all filmed. We got to know their backstories, because they were young, like we were. They had aspirations. They had all these plans. They had early stage careers, as we call it now. And you kind of got to know them. And this used all of the new technology. It was cheap to make. It was designed so it could be filmed very, very easily, very, very cheaply. The famous strapline you'll remember at the beginning, it said that The Real World would find out what happens when people stop being polite and start getting real, which I thought was so cool because I was 20 and I thought it was fantastic. But what it wasn't was fly on the wall documentary. It was much closer to An American Family. It was much more about a new form of reality. And all of those questions about the producer, the role of the producer, how real and authentic this is, or how staged and manipulated this is, the questions that we still have about reality TV today, all of them begin to emerge very early on in the real world. Because this was about capturing conflict as well as people getting on. I mean, we paint this lovely picture of these cool kids in these lovely apartments. What people learned very quickly was you can cast people for camaraderie, but you can also cast people for conflict.
I mean, I really don't think that I'm using 2020 hindsight. I remember really clearly watching it and knowing that this whole scenario had been manipulated, that they had very clearly been chosen so that they would be in tension with each other. They had very obviously done that, and you would kind of have to be half awake to not realize that in watching it. It's kind of baked into the premise, as you can see that that's what they were doing. So it raised those questions very early on about the ways in which they were being manipulated. We didn't know how much manipulation was happening behind the scenes, but the casting in and of itself was a manipulated reality.
Yeah. We're in that modern world now where you have people living in a reality environment and you have producers in another room in the same building with a bank of monitors watching what's happening and being able to plan what's happening. And the grammar of reality TV really is born on the real world. One of the producers said that they created moments of drama by creating scenarios, and they described it as throwing pebbles in the pond, that they would do these manipulations, these interventions, and they'd film the response.
Yeah. But I mean, that's a slightly self-serving metaphor, right? Because that's a very gentle metaphor, throwing pebbles in the pond. But they actually were throwing pebbles at sitting ducks that they had put in a pond.
That's a better way of putting it.
That's actually what they were doing. Was let's see what happens when you actually throw it at them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the producers had worked on TV soaps. So that idea that you can create storylines while making a show that's called The Real World, that tension's there from the outset. And they found ways that are still used today, that are still controversial today, of building storylines and getting people basically to narrate storylines that aren't of their own creation. They invented the idea of the little confessional studio where you talk to camera.
Yeah, you talk about the grammar of reality TV. This is the absolute building block of it, isn't it? Is that direct confessional interview with the camera where they say what they're really thinking and then you watch them interact with everybody else.
And people are encouraged and they are goaded into giving a response that will be useful to the producers to create the storyline that they want. This is called a master interview, MIVs. If you're on a reality TV show, they say it's time for a MIV and you have to go and, you might have signed up to be on a lovely desert island with all of these kind of wonderful people and you'll spend half your time in a MIV being asked the same questions over and over and over again because they're trying to build the narration of the storyline that they want to create. Very often people are asked to speak in the present tense so that they are literally narrating events that happened in the past that are going to be part of the show. There was also a tool that became known in the real world as the Frankenbite, which is half Frankenstein and half soundbite, where they would cut together different bits of sentences to create new meanings. All of these ethical questions about how people are being presented, how they are being manipulated. You can see that in the way that journalists and academics were writing about the real world because it was so shockingly new that there's so millions of words are written about this astonishing show.
But as you say, those ethical questions were clear from the outset. I remember those debates. People were talking about
Well, I remember them. I don't remember stopping watching, and one of the stories about reality TV is I can do the hand wringing, look at these ethical questions. I'm a TV producer. I loved this.
Yeah. I actually did stop watching it. It made me uncomfortable. So I personally didn't enjoy it. I would tune in occasionally because it was a cultural phenomenon. And so you would sort of want to know what was happening. So I'd watch it sometimes. But the thing that made me uncomfortable wasn't so much the ethical thing. I'm not saying I was that high-minded. Is the tension. I didn't really enjoy that very much. Watching people fight was like too much like my youth. I was like, oh, this is like growing up. I don't need to watch this.
Yeah, I was brought up in 1990s Newcastle. Watching people fight was not a new experience.
I don't really need this. But it was absolutely part of the conversation, though, was that people were aware by that point. We were talking with an American family about, them not knowing what it was that they were getting themselves into and not knowing what the ramifications would be. By this point, we knew that experimenting on people was problematic. We had worked out the Milgram stuff. And so everybody knew that this was an experiment that was happening. But it also goes back to what we were saying about people like Margaret Mead and Baudrillard reacting to reality TV in the first place, was that not just the ethical questions, but they understood that there were these lines being blurred between reality and fakery, between, truth and deceit that were actually really important. So the ethics aren't just about the individuals taking part. The ethics are about how we understand the fabric of our society.
Yeah. And claims to reality. We call it reality TV. And yet the question has always been, how real is this? How real can this be? And am I watching something which was the brainchild of a producer who had a crazy idea in a room full of a bank of monitors? Or is this something which has happened innately without intervention? And the fact that you're never clear, the fact that you're being manipulated as well as the person who is taking part. That tension has been there from really, really early on, and we see it in the real world. And you also see the thing which is another kind of feature of reality TV, which is the first series, people behave differently to the second series. Yeah. Because in the first series, it is new. You haven't watched it. No one's had a chance to see it. No one knows what's expected of them. And by the time you get to series 3 and 4, people are kind of consciously or subconsciously playing the roles that they've already seen. So the first series of any reality TV show is almost always the best.
And they're playing to the rules, aren't they? I mean, this is something, we'll get back to this, but we are having this conversation because you were on Traitors. And it was very much a conversation in the most recent series of non-celebrity Traitors in the UK, wasn't it? That the participants, the contestants knew what the rules were. And so they were constantly trying to game the game, right? Yeah. And so you get into these layers of people, what they understand about what the scenario is that they're in. But I also think it's really important to underscore what you said there a minute ago, because we haven't talked about it enough in my view, which is that we were all aware that the participants were being manipulated. We were much less aware of the fact that we were being manipulated. And that sense in which reality TV is always manipulating the audience as well has had very serious ramifications in the world, right? So the manipulation, we can talk about the ethics of manipulating the participants, but there's an ethical question about manipulating audiences' understanding of what they're seeing.
But there's always those moments in reality TV when we sort of get rightly concerned about its ethics, where it does that thing that it did right at the beginning with Lance Loud and An American Family, where it does something kind of amazing and it throws into the public conversation people who are remarkable. And the third series of The Real World in San Francisco had a guy called Pedro Zamora, who was 22-year-old. He was a Cuban-American, and he was a young guy living with HIV/AIDS, a young gay guy. And he suddenly became the human face of a condition that had been repeatedly, regularly misrepresented. And his story, his example, his humanity really, really cut through. And whenever you want to kind of condemn and dismiss reality TV, it does something like this, where it does something remarkable that nothing else can do, because he gave a face to this condition and to what was happening to many thousands of people across the world. And that became the big story.
Yeah. And we were talking a minute ago about the way that it can work to destigmatize. And obviously, as everyone listening will know, in the 80s and early 90s in America, HIV/AIDS still had a huge stigma attached to it. We're really just starting to try to challenge those stigmas at that time. Again, you and I both remember Pedro Zamora. He was just such a likable person, and his humanity, again, it just challenged those stereotypes. But then there was an incredible ending to, I don't want to call it a story because it's this young man's life, but it converged with the TV story.
Yeah, he was very sick when the series was broadcast, and he passed away hours after the final episode was broadcast. And it was this unreal world of reality TV and this very, very real world of this terrible disease then that people did not know how to control. We didn't have the technology. We didn't have the medicines and the therapies. And life and this kind of crazy art form, collided in a way that was kind of incredibly poignant. And it was a massive conversation. And it did change how people thought about HIV/AIDS in America and outside of America. I mean, you were in the States, I was here. I remember this really, really well. President Clinton spoke about this kind of remarkable young man and what he had taught people.
And this is where we're starting to see, I think, what will increasingly be the case is the ways in which reality TV is changing reality, not just TV. Because, we've got a president now, it would have been the equivalent of the president talking about candid camera, right? But you've got the president talking about something because it is a social phenomenon and something really important culturally is happening.
Yeah. Reality TV, there's always this urge that people have to dismiss it as something that's frivolous and meaningless and entertainment and bubblegum and not really important. But it is. It's an absolutely really critical cultural phenomenon. And when President Clinton was talking about Pedro Zamora, it was because this is part of our culture. This is not something which is external. It's not something that you can avoid. And you might not like it. And you might sort of be disturbed, as I think we should be, by its excesses and by some of its ethical challenges. But it really is important.
The Real World was incredibly successful. It ran for 33
seasons, yeah. I think I was too old for the latter ones. I don't remember those. Yeah.
You grew out of it eventually.
You do grow out of it, yeah.
And I mentioned that they had a kind of effect on Queer Eye, a show I'm incredibly fond of, because they would move across different cities as well.
That's
so
right,
they would have these, amazing new apartments in different cities. So all the major cities were featured. But the format also started to evolve in ways that we would recognize.
Yeah, so much of what we now just get as the grammar of reality TV was pioneered on the Real World. It moved from city to city. It became more heavily produced. It created apartments that kind of had like lots of different colors. The way that those apartments were set up so that they could be filmed created a kind of visual grammar that you might not understand why it's there, but you can kind of, you get it. It also created the idea of tasks or assignments that you were sent out on challenges and that you had to interact, and that would either kind of bring you all together as a group or it would cause some conflict that would be good television. And it began to sort of set the scene for kind of the gamification of reality TV, which is now a whole other kind of species of reality TV. But inside the TV industry, it did something else. It showed that this stuff could really, really be a hit and that it was cheap. It was much cheaper than making television drama. And so if you were a young TV producer at the end of the 90s, the beginning of the noughties, the 2000s, and you were looking to make your name and make your fortune, reality TV is where you'd want to be. Now, I was exactly that and didn't work this out. So I'm saying this.
The question did arise.
Those guys are on their yachts.
You didn't produce Big Brother.
No. The people who worked it out aren't doing podcasts. They're on their yachts. But it was an incredible place where there was creativity, new creativity. There was a lot of money to be made because these shows not only were popular, if you had a brilliant idea, it could go around the world and be made and syndicated and licensed around the world. The problem was that TV loves what's new. Audiences love what's new. It's not let's do again what we did last year. Everything's got to be different. And the temptation that my industry didn't resist was to ramp up the intensity, ramp up the controversy, ramp up the conflict, to seek sensation, and to cross ethical lines.
In order to keep innovating. So the innovation entails continuing to push ethical boundaries.
Well, I always think there's two forms of innovation in television. There's those that are kind of creative and technological, but there's also what sometimes passes for innovation, which is actually just crossing lines. And I think you see both in this kind of crazy period in the history of reality TV, which really began with the advent of the new century. And for millions of people watching these shows, it also presented them with a new form of fame, because those who managed to ride this wave of these programs, you could really transform your life. If you were clever, you were lucky, you were strategic, you did well in one program, you could emerge back into the world with a new form of fame that could be monetized. You could have careers you couldn't have dreamed of. It was meritocratic and it was open and it was kind of innovative in some really, really astonishing ways. But that struggle between the ethical concerns, the urge to be ever more outrageous, ever more exploitative in order to create new shows, and that potential to create something that says something important, that's the story that kind of tips very strongly in one direction in the decades to come. And the 2000s is not the glory age of reality TV. And next week we'll talk about some shows that really, really shouldn't have been made.
Okay, so on that note,
brace yourself.
Exactly.
There's some ugly shows coming.
Exactly, but also some familiar juggernauts in the 2000s, Big Brother, Survivor, the lineage that leads all the way to Traitors.
To Traitors, yeah.
But for now, we'll need to leave reality TV on the brink. But join us next time because we will find out then how far they really were prepared to push it.
Thank you for listening.